First of all, I would just want to honor you, John, for your work. And I want to honor all of you for the challenging times that we are living in. And I want to speak briefly about coronavirus, climate change, and the myth of perpetual progress. But I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that. I did that in the morning. But I really want to talk about three things that can allow us to be inspired in a local way in these difficult, challenging times. I want to speak about identity, history, and ministry. And by ministry, I mean where we can be a contribution as a collective, as congregations, as individuals, as families. Because, there's that old 12-step prayer, prayer, that serenity prayer. God, life, reality, let me accept the things that I can't change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The reason that that's really an essence of sanity, sobriety, peace of mind and heart in challenging times is that to be accepting of what you can't change is to say, it's to live in the space of, okay, here's what's real. Now, what's possible? And living out of that sense of possibility by accepting what's real. Those of you that were on the little thing we did prior to this, I use the word God and reality interchangeably. And by God, I'm simply meaning reality with a personality, not a person outside reality. But accepting what's real, trusting what is, celebrating what's so, trusting reality, trusting the universe. These are all different ways of getting to that place of seeing what's real, what's out of our control, and then just accepting that as what it is, and then living from the place of possibility within that. So clearly, we're now dealing with something, this coronavirus, that is fundamentally changing the world. Now, the coronavirus didn't cause the current economic meltdown. It was a trigger, and there were many systemic, structural, unsustainable factors in every city-based civilization, and certainly in industrial civilization. And it was only a matter of time that something would trigger this kind of a meltdown, a depression. And so that's out of our control. But of course, what is in our control is caring for ourselves, connecting with others. And so the sense of identity, to know and remind yourself that you are not separate from life. You are not separate from Gaia. You are not separate from God, if you want to use mythic language. You are not separate from reality. You're a part of reality. You're an expression of reality. You're a unique expression of reality. And to live with that sense of identity that doesn't stop, not the skin-encapsulated ego, as Alan Watts regularly criticized, but that our larger body, our larger self, is life itself. Well, two quotes from Brian Swim, a physicist who co-authored with Thomas Berry the universe story. He says, 4 billion years ago, Earth was molten rock, and now it sings opera. Earth was once molten rock, and now it sings opera. We grow out of the dynamics of the planet in the same way that apples grow out of an apple tree. We are literally organically related. You can't be alienated. You can think, you can feel alienated if you forget that you are part of the body of life. If your thinking is not aligned with reality, you can feel alienated, but you can't be alienated. We all interrelate, interbeing. So that's one thing. Another quote that I love from Brian Swim, he says, you can take the whole universe story and sum it up in 2 sentences. You take a great cloud of hydrogen gas and you just leave it alone, and it becomes rose bushes, giraffes, and human beings. So that sense that we emerge out of this creative process, that however we speak about it, we're part of that, and our identity is part of that. The other thing about our identity is to recognize that you're mortal, and our species is mortal, and we're not going to last forever. We will absolutely go extinct at some point. It may be 1 million or 2 million years from now. It may be in the next 50 years. That's absolutely possible, because as the Arctic shrinks and less ice in the Arctic, more of that heat that was reflected off in the summer gets absorbed into the shallow, deep ocean. The Arctic Ocean is like, if you imagine a swimming pool, a large swimming pool, the deep part is like a hula hoop in the middle. The rest is shallow shelf. So as there's less ice, that gets absorbed, releasing more methane, and that's where things could wig out. It's a gift to be aware of that, because when we remind ourselves that, let me put it this way, if you're not aware that there's at least a 5% chance that you could die in the next year, that there's at least a 5% chance that somebody really close to you could die in the next year from coronavirus or from starvation or whatever, if you're not aware of that there's at least a 5% chance, your thinking is not aligned with reality. And so what this provides for us isn't just freak out. It's not just depression. It's like, okay, that's real. And there's probably at least a 25% chance that our species will go extinct in the next 30 years. So being with that, then we don't put off what's called completion conversations. And there are several ways that this moves into the sense of, well, let me say something about history, but this moves into ministry. History is that recognition that the universe story is our story. We're all part of this great story. So our history goes back before humans. It goes back to star. We are stardust, as I'm sure you all know. Our bodies are made of star stuff. The atoms of our bodies are literally forged. We're forged in super red giants and supernovas. So we're part of the body of life. So that sense of identity, of history that goes back through all of life, evolution is our sacred story. I want to really focus for the rest of this time on ministry. Where can we as individuals in this coronavirus time, in a time of abrupt climate change? See, a lot of people don't know that we're in an abrupt climate change regime. Abrupt climate change means 10,000 years of climate change in one human lifetime. That's how fast things are rapid. And it seems like all the evidence I've seen that abrupt climate change really began probably in the mid-1980s. So some things are already out of our control. If 7 billion people woke up tomorrow morning committed to doing the right thing, it's quite possible that it's already out of our control. So again, being with that, trusting reality, is not to just fret about that or go get drunk. It's to basically say, okay, here's what's real. Now, what gives life meaning? Well, what has always given life meaning? Through all of history, and especially in declining times. As I shared in my earlier program, we have over 100 examples of previous contracting civilizations, and we know a lot about how people can have meaningful, joyful lives of fulfillment in times of collapse. And it's always looking outside yourself and finding another person or other people or other species that you can be a blessing to. When we look beyond ourselves and we look to how can we contribute, how can we make a difference in the lives of others. Now, it's challenging when we can't even touch each other, when we can't even hug each other. I mean, there's so much starvation for touch, and that's understandable, but we can still do it. And I want to offer just a couple ways. One, one aspect of completion conversations, to write a list. I did this when I had cancer 10 years ago, and I looked at the possibility I could die in the next 8 months. I wrote a list of everybody that had been a blessing to me, everybody that had been a contribution to me, everybody that I could think of, that I could remember, that in some way had contributed to me. And then I made a project, and it took several months, to go through and personally communicate. I wrote letters, I did email, I picked up the phone. There were a couple people that I could visit, and I just communicated my gratitude. My second grade teacher, was still alive. I communicated gratitude. And when you communicate out of the blue, genuine appreciation and gratitude to the people who have been a blessing to you, you'll make their month. You won't just make their day. You won't just make their week. You will make their month. So being a blessing simply by communicating gratitude, you can do that without even seeing each other. So I encourage you to really have that kind of completion conversation, so that if somebody in your life dies, or when somebody in your life dies in the next year, most likely it'll be a when, not just an if, that you won't think to yourself, I never communicated. I never told them how grateful I was. So Gratitude conversations. I could tell stories. I don't have time to do that, but of life-changing, tear-jerking, amazing experiences of people telling. I'll just tell one. I had shared this with a very curmudgeonly woman who was the business manager of the seminary I attended. And I told her about my writing a letter to my father, a 17-page letter, and how it was, you know, he was moved to tears, I was moved to tears, and had this incredible thing. Well, I told her that, and then about 4 days later, 5 days later, I came into the seminary and she called me into her office. Michael, come here. I thought I'd done something wrong. And I said, what? She said, you know that story you told me about your father and you writing a letter of gratitude to him? I said, yeah. She said, well, I was really touched by that and I was inspired. I just wrote a letter to my husband. We've been married 46 years. She said, I sent it to his work. I just talked to him. She said, I haven't heard him cry in 25 years. Thanks for sharing that story. So that's what I mean, communicating gratitude. The other thing is to communicate regret, to communicate sorrow. You know, in the 12-step world, they call it making amends, but you know, it doesn't have to be a big deal, but it just in some way to communicate, write a list again of all the people that you've harmed, betrayed, had a negative influence on, just you did something inadvertently that it had a negative impact on or whatever, but any way that you can communicate. And it can often be just, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I know what a jerk I was or what a shit I was is the way I said it. There were two people that I had to say that. So communicating regret, communicating sorrow, communicating that you know, you just want them to know that there was some negative fallout. There was something negative. When you do that, you will also make someone's week or month because people don't expect that. I remember hearing years ago, somebody, and this is why this is important, because we're in contraction. We're in contracting times. We're in most likely the beginning of a new Great Depression. And the people who you can count on, the people you can rely upon, the people who will be there for you and you'll be there for them starts with blood family. And then it can span out. Congregations have a vital role to play in this community. But I remember a teacher said one time, he said, if you want magic to occur, in any relationship where there used to be closeness, there used to be affinity, there used to be a bond, and now there's not. There was a falling out, it got stale, whatever. If you want magic to occur, do the opposite of what we normally instinctually do, which is what we normally do is we blame them for everything that didn't or doesn't work in the relationship. We take credit for everything that did or does work in the relationship. And of course, they're doing the same thing. So it's not a surprise that we're estranged. He said, do the opposite. You give them credit for everything that did or does work in the relationship. You take full responsibility for everything that didn't or doesn't work in the relationship and shut up. I was taught that 22 years ago. I have never seen it fail. It's oftentimes, even if that person is still loaded for bear and has all kinds of ammo in their psychology about you, you will evaporate it. It evaporates when you take full responsibility for everything that didn't or doesn't work in the relationship. You give them credit for everything that did or doesn't work in the relationship and just shut up. So these are ways of having completion conversations, of being complete, so that if somebody in your life dies or you die in the next year or 2 or 3, you won't have that thought, oh, I never communicated my gratitude. I never told that person I was sorry or whatever. So these are ways that you can be an enormous blessing to others. As I mentioned in the earlier program, hundreds, maybe thousands of species of plants and shrubs and trees will go extinct this century unless humans assist them in migrating faster than any other animal can move their seeds. So assisting plants in migrating north in this part of the world, south if you're in the southern hemisphere, is holy work. Building topsoil is holy work. Anything that you can do to be a blessing to life is holy work. So I think the last thing I want to say is just as a congregation, these are difficult times. There's no easy answers. And if we can keep our hearts open with generosity, with compassion, and honor our grief, channel our anger, and then find ways of being a blessing to others, including having these kinds of completion conversations, we can have, each of us as individuals and our families can have meaningful, soul-nourishing days and weeks and months before we die, whether that's many years from now or whether that's soon. And so I just invite all of us to stay in that tender-hearted place and find ways to be a contribution. Amen.